And welcome to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast. And Richard, my lovely co-host, my beautiful, dashing co-host, welcome. The year is the distant future of 2019. How are you, Richard? I'm AJ.
Yeah, I'm Richard. I'm good. We've got... Yeah, I mean, essentially, 2016 was pretty rough. And then... I imagine, we sort of midway through 2019 now, there's a presidential election next year, which will be interesting. But yeah, I think it'll be smooth sailing for the next few years.
You don't think something major will disrupt the timeline, like, say, androids will dominate through society, and
androids dreaming of electric sheep? Or a blackout, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That won't happen.
No, I don't think anything like that will happen in the next few years.
Well, let us live in our ignorance, Richard, because we're looking into an alternate future anyway. This fortnight on our little show where we cover a different film franchise every fortnight, and this year specifically, we're only doing 2 film franchises. And what a 2-film franchise to finally get to sink our teeth into, Richard. I reckon that this franchise was worth bringing back 2-film franchises into the fold.
Yeah, totally.
By itself, right? Because we, of course, finally covering the 2 Blade Runner films. The 2 Blade Runner films, of course, consist of Blade Runner from 1982, directed by Ridley Scott, and Blade Runner 2049 from 2017, directed by Denis Villeneuve. A name I don't think I'll ever be able to pronounce correctly.
And when you say we're finally covering it, there's a couple of meanings there, because you talk about 8 years into the life of the podcast, we are finally covering it. But also, although interestingly, this has one of the franchises that has the distinction of not being a franchise when we started the podcast.
True.
But it's also, this episode is running a little bit late, and... people might be wondering why, and the reason is actually quite interesting, because just random happenstance, this wasn't to tie into it or anything like that, but a cinema near us, or near one of us, was actually doing a double feature of Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. However, it was on the same day that we normally would be editing the podcast and release it that night. And so I know what you're thinking, you delayed it so that, whoever was in that city could go to that screening. No.
No. Well, initially.
Yeah.
Initially, but no, those tickets were sold out like tears and rain, Richard, by the time I went to go and purchase them.
But we still delayed the podcast, is very funny.
Yeah, we still delayed the podcast because why stop now, I guess. That reminds me of how things work in, like, politics, you know? Like, the reason for something existing will vanish, but it still remains
it was
the
set
same
up that way.
Backwards method. Yeah, exactly. So this episode is a little late, but we do have a lot to get through, Richard, because the first Blade Runner film especially, it carries with it a lot of baggage that, we don't necessarily build this as a listen to us talk about the making of podcast. I like to think it's more of a marriage of facts and feelings, something that, traditionally don't care at all about each other.
Yeah, those usually don't overlap.
But no, there is a lot to cover. There's a lot to get through for a franchise that I feel like this is the strongest case. Until 2049 came out, this is one of the stronger cases for a film franchise only needs one film, because there's a lot of surrounding stuff to do with Blade Runner.
Yeah.
There's a lot of...
Well, there's also 7 different versions of the first film.
We could have just done a whole podcast covering each 7 different versions. But yes, Blade Runner 1982, directed by Ridley Scott. In a Cult Popture first... this has 2 Rotten Tomatoes scores, I'll count. So your uncanny ability to perfectly guess a Rotten Tomatoes score for any given movie you're now doubly likely to get it right. So what do you think Blade Runner has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I'm going to say like 88.
Yeah, we've got 89 for the 1982 theatrical release. And we've got 94 for the final cut, which is the version we watched, which is the version that was screening at the cinema that I was going to go to, and is seemingly the only widely distributed available version of this film that exists. And I want to talk about that first, because I think it's super interesting that, and I cannot think of really any other example where anything other than the first, like the theatrical cut, is considered the one you watch. Like, you think of things like E.T., or I mean, famously, the Star Wars, even though...
Famously, the Star Wars.
The Star Wars cuts, I mean, they are pretty hard to come by, the original theatrical cuts these days, but you talk to any Star Wars fan and they'll talk about how, like, but that's the version that they would want to watch. Film nerds don't call it A New Hope. They call it Star Wars because that's what the original was called.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there are... especially like in film nerd circles, there are films where it's like, you have to watch XYZ version. Is it Kingdom of Heaven, Ridley Scott movie? Is like
probably
that has a director's cut.
Happens to him a lot.
Yeah, that has a director's cut that it's like the theatrical is terrible, but the director's cut is not only an improvement, it's like fantastic.
Right, I didn't know that about Kingdom
apparently, and that's one that it's like people talk about. It's Orlando Bloom. Edward Norton's in it in like an uncredited role in an iron mask. But yeah, it's like this interesting thing where that is the definitive version of the film, but it's not. If you went to the the supermarket for some reason, if you went to the DVD store,
the movie supermarket,
and bought a DVD of it, I don't know that would necessarily be like, not in the same way that Blade Runner, the final cut, has like overwritten access to the original. Like, you would have to find an old copy, pre-2007, I think was the final cut. You'd have to find a DVD or VHS or whatever that predates that, or like a bumper Blu-ray pack that has all the different versions. Because there was also, interestingly, a director's cut in the 92, which... like, it was still another 15 years later before Ridley Scott did the final cut, which is the only one that he has had full creative control over, because the director's cut still had some studio interference. But yeah, it's funny that then when he finally got to do his director's cut, they had to give it another name because he's already done that.
From what I've read, the differences between the final cut and the director's cut are so infinitesimal that I don't consider. I think we've had this version of Blade Runner since the 90s, not since 2007. It's just like a couple of scenes are longer in the final cut.
Yeah. And also some of these versions were only screened like once as well. Like, when you talk, it's not. I think it's difficult to. It's not like you get. You could find a DVD that has all 7 versions.
A bumper, an omnibus. That would be great. Because even with things like Zack Snyder's Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League is treated as a different film to Justice League.
It ostensibly is,
so even exactly. So even in that case, it's like that's maybe the closest analog, but usually people are like, no, whatever made it to cinemas first, that's the one we're counting. But yeah, so I have got a list of the differences between the 7 cuts, and we'll get to that in a second, but let's just do some basic rundowns first. Blade Runner is based on a Philip K. Dick novel from 1968 called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I believe...
I believe they don't.
I believe they do. Philip K. Dick has had a few like sci-fi novels make it and like get theatrical or get movie adaptations. You've got A Scanner Darkly is one of my favorites. You've also got
Minority
Total
Report.
Recall,
which is called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, I believe is the name of that.
Which feels, I was just going to say, it feels like it holds hands with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep as maybe okay book titles, but don't call the movie that. So, what is Blade Runner, the final cut, I guess, about?
Broadly speaking, it's set in this dystopian future, dystopian in some ways. It became, Blade Runner has such like iconic iconography that a lot of people, I think, wouldn't think of it necessarily as a dystopia, because this shaped how we look at sci-fi and what we think looks cool for decades. But it is a dystopia. And in this future, this guy Tyrell, head of the Tyrell Corporation, created replicants, which are they're like humans in almost every way. Which are made to work off-world in like space colonies, just to do manual labor, essentially. And I guess we'll talk about what replicants really are and what it means, probably at some point, or we can do it now. They're synthetic humans. They're not like androids, though.
So, as the title of the novel suggests, they're as you say, synthetic. From what I understand, in the novel, they are explicitly androids. The term replicant is not used in the novel. They are called Andes or androids in the novel. And what has always kind of been vague to me about Blade Runner is like, what are replicants? Because they're not presented as robotic in really any way beyond they have like barcodes and written on their bones and things like that.
And that's more or less absent from the first film as well.
Correct. Yeah. I would guess that it's more a case of like it's like
the lab grown humans.
The natural progression of Beyond Beef, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's designed in a lab, but ostensibly human, but they have certain limitations.
Mostly to do with emotion.
Revolt. After a replicant revolt, they gave the Nexus 8s, I think, a 4-year lifespan to prevent them from getting too far ahead of themselves when they come to liberating their colonies.
Yeah, and so we learn a little bit more about replicants and history of it in 2049. But a big thing about it is their sort of inability to process emotions, but they can sort of think they do in like an interesting way. But anyway, the film follows what is called a Blade Runner, which is a like futuristic detective who hunts down replicants that have gone AWOL and retires them or kills them. And he does this by way of the Voight-Kampff test, which is asking a series of questions that are designed to elicit an emotional response. So it's things like, you see a wasp on your arm, what do you do? And there's little micro reactions you're supposed to have to hearing these things. And the Blade Runner is like got this microscope on your eye trying to see, and he meets this special replicant named Rachel, and they begin a love affair, kind of a one-sided love affair in a lot of ways, but the interesting thing about her is that she doesn't know she's a replicant, so the test took a lot longer with her because she didn't know any of this stuff. Meanwhile, the antagonist of the film is Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, who is the leader of this group of replicants who have returned back to Earth to destroy their maker, to kill Tyrell and to lead this sort of uprising you mentioned.
Well, I think officially their mission is to fix the 4-year lifespan thing. They want to live longer.
And so that's the interesting thing about Roy Batty as a villain. He's a great villain, I think. Is that, like what he wants is a very natural human desire to live longer, and not even like, you see villains and things like fucking on Stranger Tides, the Pirates of the Caribbean film,
Sure.
that like wanting to achieve immortality is an evil thing, or like, you know, Jafar, and there's like infinite power, but like Roy Batty wants to feel more human, essentially wants to have a normal non 4-year lifespan, and I think that's an interesting and empathetic journey for the film.
Very, very much so. Yeah. So the end of Blade Runner, the director and final cut, but was also the intended ending all along, includes a scene in which Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, who's the main character, he's shown having a dream about a unicorn. And then at the end, I think his name is Gaff.
Gaff, yeah.
One of these other guys who's sort of been like, he's like second in command of whoever's in command of the Blade Runners, basically.
Yeah. Who's played
the whole movie.
Yeah. The head of the Blade Runners, his like captain, Emmett Walsh, who's the Jill's dad on Home Improvement.
Yeah, okay. Yep, that's one of his roles. The whole movie, Gaff has been making these little origami animals just as like a funny character quirk. And at the end of Blade Runner, Deckard, as he's running away with Rachel after Roy Batty has just expired, basically, after nearly killing Deckard. And he's running away with Rachel to live.
Well, he saves Deckard's life.
Yeah. He runs away with Rachel to live his life with her, and finds that Gaff has left him a origami unicorn. The implication being that Gaff knows what Deckard dreams about, and therefore Deckard is also a replicant. Something which
has been debated for 40 years.
Yeah, it was debated for 40 years, and I don't know. I haven't seen the other cuts, so I don't know how much of it was left in there, or how much of it was implied. Are you familiar
with what happens in the original cut?
Yeah, should we go through?
Yeah, because it's
what
the unicorn dream isn't present at all, I believe.
No.
And they drive off into the sunset with a voiceover. And so I think it's like. Yeah. It's implied in the same way that, like, any film about, like, it could be anyone,
like a fan theory.
Where it's like, of course people are going to speculate about that, because you're also never explicitly told he's not in the film.
But it's so much stronger to leave the implication there. I think it is insane that they were never allowed to do this till 1992. Imply that the character,
It's I mean, and it's such an interesting thing as well. We'll talk about the versions, but then I want to have more of this discussion about, is Deckard a replicant, because so many people involved disagree as well, and it's this really interesting conversation on like authorial intent and like because apparently Ford and Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford disagreed and had arguments about it. Ford vehemently believed he's not. Scott obviously, implies in the film that he is. Even being asked, and it's funny because Harrison Ford getting asked about Star Wars is such a meme that he's like, I don't fucking give a shit. But like Blade Runner, he seemed to actually really enjoy these conversations. And one of the best things about 2049, I think, is that it doesn't definitively answer the question either, which is,
it doesn't answer the question, but it knows you're wondering it and allows that to froth a little bit, which is such a good decision.
I wouldn't have thought you could make a sequel without answering it, but especially one so distant, when it's like all these things about their lifespan or all the stuff that have to be answered. But apparently, I think since the release of 2049, Harrison Ford has said, like, I've always thought he was a replicant. I was just playing devil's advocate for everyone, sort of thing. But it's like there's all these things of like the costume designer thinks he wasn't, the props person thinks he was, and like everyone involved on the film has an opinion and they all differ, and it's like, and I think maybe even the writer and Ridley Scott might disagree, but and this is actually a conversation we're going to have on this episode, whether you like it or not, AJ, that like the director versus the writer saying something is like canon, and like who is God in Word of God canon? Is it the writer or the director?
Yeah.
Which will come up again.
Richard is referring to an argument we had 5 years ago about not what we've just described, about another thing. But he has set it up, which is, I guess that makes it okay for me to talk about because you've like narratively laid the seeds for it now. It's not just like, I want to talk about this to embarrass you, AJ.
AJ, there was no way you were going to get out of the Blade Runner episode without having this discussion with me.
Well, next franchise, let's do one that you once said something stupid about, and we'll enjoy making...
AJ, the only stupid thing I've ever said is that I thought that the drumstick was part of the chicken wing and not the chicken leg.
No, you said you were shocked to learn that I thought The Incredibles was set in the 60s. We talked about that when we covered Incredibles, about how it definitively is.
Yeah,
but AJ, I've come around since then. So have I, for everything you bring up out of the past. I've also come around. Okay, anyway, so yes, as you said, 7 different versions of Blade Runner exist. These are the 7 versions with a brief description of what's different about them. So in 1982, there was a work print prototype that was used in test previews. It had negative reception, and so it was recut, and the studio, this is where the studio interference comes in because of this work print prototype getting a bad reception, even though subsequent screenings of it in later years received positive receptions. There was also in 1982 a San Diego sneak preview, which is nearly identical to the theatrical version, except that it included 3 additional scenes not shown before or since. So never seen in any other version. These scenes were not part of the final cut either, and included a scene introducing Roy Batty in a vidphone booth, a shot of Deckard reloading his gun after Batty broke his fingers, and a scene where Deckard and Rachel ride off into the sunset. I don't know if him reloading his gun is a scene. It feels more like a quiet beat that could have been part of another. Yeah, a shot, yeah. Then, of course, there's the US theatrical release, which was also in 1982. This was considered the definitive version for a long time. This included a happy ending, as well as the addition of Harrison Ford's voiceover, where, you know, Blade Runner obviously takes a lot of cues from film noir. It is often called a neon noir, and a trope of noir is to feature a voiceover, but reportedly none of the creative people involved in getting this movie out wanted to do a voiceover at all. There's been a lot of talk that Harrison Ford intentionally flubbed the voiceover by doing like a really unenthused reading of it that ended up in the film. Harrison Ford has responded to this and basically said, it's because it's a shit script. Like, I didn't do it bad on purpose. It's just, it wasn't written by the people who wrote the rest of the film. Yeah. And
I don't think, it is funny that, like, for years, everyone's like, oh man, it's so funny how you, like, deliberately did such a shit job. And he was like, I was trying. I was trying my fucking hardest at that. I don't think, as much as he has a reputation for being like a curmudgeon, I don't think he's the kind of person to like half-ass. Like he's a professional. No. I think
he's in Star Wars 9, guys. He's in Star Wars 7. Of course, he's not going to half-ass like when he's cast. So he takes his job seriously. Like his reputation's just as much on the line as, like, look how good he is in Anchorman 2, right? Like he cares about this shit.
Do you know, like a surprisingly like good late stage Harrison Ford showing that he's still got it is Shrinking, the Apple TV series. It's like probably the best performance of his career, to be honest. Wow. And it's like, it's crazy that they got Harrison Ford.
I need to check that out. I'll add it to the list of shows that I can watch now that I live by myself. So then also in 1982 there was an international theatrical release, also known as the Criterion Edition. Included 3 more violent action scenes than the US theatrical version. Then there was the 1986 US broadcast version, which toned down the violence, profanity, and nudity, which is like, a lot of movies have something like this, and it's like, it's only on the Wikipedia page because there are 6 other cuts. So it's like, well, I guess we got to include the TV cut as well. And then, of course, the director's cut in 1992. This included the removal of Deckard's 13 explanatory voiceovers. It also had an insertion of a dream sequence of a unicorn running through a forest at the 42-minute mark, and the removal of the studio-imposed happy ending, including some associated visuals which had originally run under the film's end credits. In this version, the film ends with when the elevator doors close as Deckard and Rachel leave. And then, of course, the final cut in 2007, the version we watched, which contains the original full-length version of the Unicorn Dream, which had never been in any other version and had been restored. And why I think that this is silly to even, it sounds like the director's cut was enough, is the version that's in the film is maybe a minute long, and so not even that, get it. You've seen a unicorn in it, so it's like he just extended that on the premiere timeline, I guess, and was like, now this is the final cut. Additionally, all of the violence and alternate edits from the international cut have been reinserted, so it's the dirtiest, grubbiest, most unicorniest version. But as I say, I think from what I understand, you get all of the story the same as you got in the director's cut. This is maybe more of just an aesthetic preference.
So AJ, I don't mean to cut you off or to put words in your mouth necessarily, but I think I know what your next question is going to be, and that is, what Blade Runner have I seen it before, and what did I think of it? And that's a great question, AJ.
Richard. I would love to ask you, what did you think of Blade Runner? Had you seen it before?
So interesting thing about Blade Runner, I watched it in probably 2007 or 2008, I think. Not too long after the maybe 2019. But I watched it. It was like a sunny afternoon, and I was like, this film's boring.
Perfect conditions.
I was like, it was. I hated it. I thought it was terrible, and so I spent so long being like, Blade Runner sucks, man. Like, it's just boring. It's slow, and it is, from what you may think of just through pop culture osmosis, it's probably slower than you think. It's more, like you say, it's more of a noir. It's more slow paced, gathering clues, etc., than the sort of cyberpunk action film that you may think it is if you don't only briefly know of it. And then I remember the trailer for 2049 came out, and I thought, fuck, it looks so good that I have to force myself to like Blade Runner in that time. So about 6 months or maybe less before 2049 came out, they did screenings of Blade Runner, the final cut, in IMAX, and you and I went to it together, I believe, which makes this
I remember it as being a lot sooner than 6 months before.
It wasn't it wasn't
immediately
before. Maybe 6 weeks rather than 6 months, but it wasn't as close as you would expect. I remember that much. But which is, and then we went to 2049 together, which is an interesting thing where it's one of the only franchises you and I have watched in its entirety together outside of the podcast.
Yeah, already having watched it together.
Yeah.
And also, if I'd managed to make it to one of those screenings that were on this week, I would have exclusively seen Blade Runner in cinemas.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, because that was your first time watching it when we went to go see it, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. So, I'd seen it once before, but it was very much a wasn't paying attention and then just decided I'd formed an opinion on it. Watching it in the cinema, I was like, I think it's a really good film. It's not in the same way that oh my god, I get it now, this is a perfect film. I still I understand the reverence for it, especially the time in which it came out, when post 5 years after Star Wars, so sci-fi was in a certain place, and then it really sort of resists a lot of what Star Wars was doing, and the things that came in Star Wars wake. But I think that I think it's a great film, and it's also, even though it introduces you to such like a complex and well-developed, fully formed world in the first film, that for so long it was one of the biggest, most beloved films of the 80s that never had any kind of follow-up or sequel. Or there were video games that I'm sure continued the story and comics and what have you, but you know, we're getting a TV series now. We got a fully fledged sequel, and there's like an anime, all this. I'm dipping into continue the franchise, but like, yeah, it's very much now. It's a cinematic universe, for lack of a better term. But yeah, just that for so long it was this one piece of art, even though it's so feels like it's destined for a sequel or like more stories in this world at least. But I guess that's also partly due to the fact that it didn't do too well at the box office because, and some people will argue.
But then again, Richard, what does?
Very good. Because it's one of the famous like bombed on release or like wasn't understood because of a lot of the reasons that we talked about, but also just I think it's kind of a hard film to market, and I think that about 2049 as well. That like 2049 was one of the biggest bombs of 2017 because it's marketed as a cool action film with Ryan Gosling at the helm, but like, yeah, Ryan Gosling wasn't a blockbuster star until very recently. He was an A-lister without ever having headlined a blockbuster. Now he's very much like, and he's said like, I don't really want to do complicated films anymore. I just, it takes up so much time out of my family that I just want to do things that are fun. And yeah, like totally good for him. Like the Fall Guy, Barbie, like he's very much a blockbuster star now. But yeah, I remember us talking about that, like 2049 is his first foray into actually leading a blockbuster, despite being a household name before that. But then it's kind of not. It's an art film. It's a very slow, intellectual arty film with the skin of a blockbuster. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I like Blade Runner now. I obviously prefer the second one.
Yeah, so I had seen the first one when we went to see it, and I liked it, but I think the 20, how old would I have been? 22? 23 when we saw it. 23-year-old AJ, we'd just started the podcast. I was obsessed with the idea of like a legacy sequel. Yeah, with you. But then again, who isn't? I was obsessed with the idea of a legacy sequel being better than the original. And after seeing both of them and then like years of gestation on it and years of like hearing the relatively popular take that like, the first Blade Runner, it's not even that good. Like it's people would say that sort of thing about it. And I kind of adopted that and was like, 2049 it improves in every single way. But in the years since watching this, something interesting's happened in my life.
You've actually become a lot more pretentious.
I've become a lot more pretentious, which you wouldn't have thought possible when I was 23. But like, something that gives me a lot of comfort now is the genre of neon noir. And I don't know how much I was into it when we first saw the original Blade Runner. But like I have had many, many long, lonely nights where I've got to sleep listening to like Blade Runner soundscapes, where it's the sort of Atmos Blade Runner score set to like rain and the sound of cars flying through the air and flying cars, not just cars in an accident that have like
completely total and rolling.
Yeah. No, and it has just become such a comfort for me, that aesthetic. And it's not like I don't also like the aesthetic of 2049 either, which is slightly different, but I don't know, there was original Blade Runner is easier to fall asleep to the soundscape of, I've found. And so I had unknowingly just really, really like built a lot of my like aesthetic and taste around the original Blade Runner. And so when I rewatched it...
Well, not even that. You've built your subconscious around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when I found out that tickets were sold out for the screening, I was like, all right, I'm just going to watch it by myself then. And I turned on my little Kirby neon light next to my TV that my partner bought me as a present. And I turned on my lava lamp, and I turned off all the lights, and I just sat down and watched this movie that it's kind of... It was the second time I watched it full through, but it was such a... it had stayed with me, I guess, since I saw it. And I went into it being like, it's the first Blade Runner. Like 2049 is where the Marvel is. But I don't know, like just watching it, I was like, man, I love this. I love this so much. I love how slow it is. I love how old school it is in some ways that maybe don't even quite make sense. I love just the dirtiness of it. It's a lot dirtier than 2049. I think a lot grimier. And every part about it just really hit me. I think the story is so interesting and so cool. One thing that I love about it is, and this is true for both films, is like interstellar travel is something that you are told exists in this universe, but you never see it because you are from the perspective of a character who is too low class to ever make it off-world. And so off-world is kind of built up as this thing that is reserved for the ultra wealthy or whatever, and you never get to see that. And I can't think of another example of a sci-fi that does that. And in fact, when recalling Blade Runner and after seeing it for the first time, I remember thinking like, do they travel off-world? And they must do, because
we should have
seen
that.
Yeah, we should have seen it, but we don't. And I love all that. I think it's so gritty and interesting and sad, and a lot of the comments it makes are like even more relevant to the way the world is going now. And so I gave it a 5-star this time. I upgraded it from I think a 4-star to a 5-star just because I really loved it. But all of this being said, Richard, we do need to talk about something that is sort of an anchor hanging around the neck of Blade Runner. And Richard, listen. You and I, we've seen things other people wouldn't believe. We've seen popular comedies from 2013 where A-listers say racist jokes that would be worse than something you'd hear in the 70s. We've watched some of the greatest directors of our time unambiguously endorse blatant pedophilia. All of these moments are very much not lost in time, and you can actually watch them on any major streaming service. Time for Problematic Corner.
Ooh, I bet this didn't age well. Let's get a laugh at someone else's expense. I have to warn you, this might get obscene. This the Problematic Corner, where ain't nothing PC.
Very good, AJ.
So, this Blade Runner exists as like a troubling example of something that has shown up in Harrison Ford's career in multiple movies, and also kind of Ridley Scott as well, and kind of like I feel like there was a period before we were like of age where just artists and directors were a lot more loose on their morals and what they thought was like provocative but still okay versus, I don't know. Basically, there's a scene in it where Deckard forces himself upon Rachel, despite her like multiple
protests.
Protests of, and look, like, the legacy of this film shows us that they loved each other and they got together, and it's very similar to a scene in the first Rocky film where basically the same thing happens, and what like the movie is also telling you is a like love story for the ages.
The thing like to like the 1980s 70s 80s like director vision of this is that like, and this is every Christmas people talk about Baby It's Cold Outside and how much of a rapey song that is, but like that song is originally by a husband and wife, and it is supposed to be playful, and it's like back in whatever time that song came out, it was like you couldn't, as a woman, you couldn't want to have sex. You couldn't, quote unquote, give it up too easily, or you would look like a harlot. And so there is this it's very of the time dance that you are supposed to do, and that is what that song is supposed to be. I'm not denying it sounds rapey, but like that's the intent behind it. And I think it's like a turned up to 11 version of that like, because we are shown, and this happens in James Bond as well, all the time. It's like plenty of movies where it's like she ended up wanting it, so it's fine. And like the thing,
or she secretly did want it the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. And so that, like,
so
that,
it's fine.
and again, I'm not saying this makes it not problematic, but like, this is how you are supposed to feel watching the scene, that she was won over. But when it's an actor like Harrison Ford, when it's an actor like Sylvester Stallone, and there's like such an obvious power imbalance as well, it makes it so much like creepier. And I mean, especially like in the first Rocky, like when specifically in that scene, he's like holding onto the top of the door frame, and he looks jacked up. And he's like blocking her exit. It's creepy, but yeah, it is. It's a very of the time thing to be like, oh, look, they're just having a little bit of back and forth, but and don't worry, she wanted it in the end. But it's like it's very much not aged well.
Yeah, and I think that as well. What we're seeing here is ultimately damaging, because it is telling the world through this very like a lot of eyes are on this particular piece of pop culture. A lot of people are watching this, and it is telling the world this is how it's done, right? And I think if you look at the likes of like the generations that would have seen Rocky and Blade Runner in cinemas, that is kind of
they're the creepiest generations.
But I would say for our generation, it's the nice guy thing.
Totally.
Right? Like we saw dozens of movies growing up in which the nerdy dude is rewarded with love or sex for being there for the girl he liked. Yeah. Right? And because that's something that I'm only just delivering myself from in the past probably 10 years, right? Is like, I think I was raised by movies to believe that even if they don't reciprocate the feelings, at the very least, confessing your love for someone is a nice thing to do.
Wow,
you know, confessing a crush. And now I've grown up and I've realized you shouldn't do that. The thing that really made me realize it was a TikTok I saw a couple years ago, which said, POV, your male friend is about to ruin the friendship. And it's just this guy laughing and then looking at the camera and going, I need to tell you something, which destroyed me. Fucking hell. It was like looking in a black mirror. But like, and like, that is something that I am moving out of now. This idea that like,
well, now that you've got a partner, it's fine. You're like,
yeah.
That's why I've stopped doing
sometimes, it. well, I think extrapolating it further to maybe not confessing love, but like confessing feelings or being,
making things awkward, yeah.
Making things awkward because you think that it will ultimately clear the air. I think that's a dangerous thing our generation has learned.
Totally.
And I think that the true answer is actually that even like sometimes you have to keep painful things to yourself, right?
Totally.
And the want to share those things, the want to tell. Here's an example from my life in which the statute of limitations, I think, has run out, so I can talk about without feel like I'm sharing private stuff. But like, say you confess your feelings you have for someone who has a boyfriend or is a lesbian, right? When you do those things, when you feel like you need the cathartic release of just letting them know and just getting the feelings out there, and knowing that they probably don't share share those feelings, like reciprocate those feelings, that is actually a selfish decision you are making for your mental health and not for theirs, right? Yeah. And so that's this generation's version of this thing in Blade Runner, which is like, no, the you need to kind of come on a little strong, and because while in the fictional cases of Rocky and Blade Runner, these female characters, they did have feelings for the person that was forcing themselves upon them. How many times do you think in real life has a dude thought he's Deckard or thought he's Rocky in a situation with a woman where he's thinking all she needs is for me to like cross this threshold?
Yeah.
I bet
and that she's
so many times.
Oh, 100%. And that and being the 80s and her being scared, they're probably married now, is what I'm saying. But they're probably in a very unhappy marriage.
That Onion article, that's like family cringes as they listen to Granddad explain like how he courted Grandma against her will, whatever it is.
But it is interesting. I think that's a good point about the sort of media that we were raised on. But yeah, what you're saying about like, I need to get this off my chest. It's like, I think 99 times out of 100, the guy best friend who thinks he's kept his feelings a secret hasn't done a very good job of keeping it a secret. She knows how you feel. She's not. She's not like acting oblivious because she is oblivious. She is acting oblivious because she enjoys spending time with you, and you will ruin things if you tell her. Like, I've not from memory. I've put myself in a situation like that because I cannot convince myself that a woman would want to hear that from me.
I don't think I've ever confessed my feelings for a woman in that way and expected her to reveal she has similar feelings.
Yeah.
Every time I've done it, and I haven't done this since my early 20s.
But in your early 20s, you did it all the time.
Yeah, that's true. And I did these things because it was painful for me to keep continuing on without any kind of like progression in the relationship.
Yeah. Well, it's also like, you feel like you're hiding something with someone that you're very close with and yada yada.
Yeah. And the truth is, if you do have these feelings for someone, the solution is to stop hanging out with them or adjust in a way that means you can be for her what she wants you to be, not what you want.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, if you do enough good deeds, like, she owes you, like, a hand job at least is probably what you're going to get, right?
Jesus Christ, Richard. Yeah, sure. So, yeah.
I'd have to check up what the conversion rate is these days, but, yeah.
We talk about titles a little bit occasionally on this podcast, Richard. And speaking of versions of me from the past, here's something I reflected on recently. If 22-year-old AJ was in charge of a Blade Runner movie, for some reason, he would have made the decision to include at least an offhand reference as to why the profession is called Blade Runner. Because why are they called Blade Runners? Well, here's the answer. The official answer is screenwriter Hampton Fancher, who wrote both films. I didn't know that till doing my research here. He wrote came back for 2049, which I think shows in 2049. Yeah, totally. He found a cinema treatment by William S. Burroughs for an Alan E. Nourse's novel called The Blade Runner from 1974, titled Blade Runner, in parentheses, a movie, was going to be the name of this movie. And Ridley Scott liked this name, and so they obtained the rights to that film so they could call this different film Blade Runner. And what pissed me off about that when I was younger, I think, is like, just come up with a bullshit reason why you've called them Blade Runners in this universe, just make something up. Or have someone in the film be like, why are they called Blade Runners? And another character be like, I don't know. That would be enough for me. Yeah, but now watching it, I'm like, I mean, we don't know what Tannhauser Gate is either. We don't know what all these, like, in an age now where I watched a video essay the other day about world building that isn't desperate to explain itself, like
Sure.
how Star Wars is and all these things. And it's something that really
You're saying
resonated
that, like,
with me
Star
because
Wars
that's
is
something
desperate to explain itself.
desperate to explain itself. And something it's something that I responded to because I've been doing it a lot in my writing recently, where I've like wanted to see how little I can get away with not explaining in a story, and still having it be like the implication being there. And now at 31, watching 2049 or both films, I guess, I'm like, I guess in the universe it will be called Blade Runner for a reason.
Yeah.
Like it, and maybe I don't need to know what that is. What do you think?
It is. I love the title. It just sounds cool. And I once ruined. I presumably ruined a comedian's night once because he was doing.
I'd like to think I ruined his life.
I hope I ruined his night, not his life. We were at some small gig, and he was like, to finish off, I'm gonna act out a movie title for you guys. And I will admit this is a dick move on my part. I immediately yelled out Blade Runner before he started doing anything. I don't know why. I think in my head I was like, I can foresee how you would mime Blade Runner. So I just said Blade Runner. And he ignored me and continued. And it was like, obviously heard me. I was not sitting that far away. No one else was talking. And then he started playing the Chariots of Fire theme, also by Vangelis, who does an incredible soundtrack to Blade Runner. And then he starts doing it, and he starts running slowly, and then it took him like quite a while. Like I think he did warm-ups and shit. And then eventually he started running, and he pulled out these two knives, and then people started shouting out Blade Runner. He's like, you got it. And I was like, he must have just been like, what do I do? Like, I have to just still do it. Like, I've got 5 minutes left in my act. I just have to pretend I didn't hear this guy. So yeah, anyway, I hope that I gave that guy a little crisis. Because, yeah, lazy act, sir.
He deserves it.
Yeah. But yeah, I do love that it's like, why are they called Blade Runners? Sounds cool.
Yeah, sounds cool.
Yeah.
Well, would you be interested, Richard, in the transitional period between the two films in our discussion, to have a little look at some not so randomly placed useless statistics?
All right.
Sort
Want
of
me to guess how many Harrison Ford films we've covered?
Yeah, how many Harrison Ford films have we covered?
Indiana Jones times 4.
No, there's more.
We didn't do Dial of Destiny on the...
No, but okay, so here's what I've written. Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 are the 7th and 8th Harrison Ford.
Yeah, I wasn't done. I was just waiting for you to confirm that.
Ah, right. No, yeah, correct. He's the 4 Indiana Jones movies.
Anchorman 2.
Yeah.
One
more.
Expendables 3?
Correct. Yes. Very nice. Do you know how many Ridley Scott movies we've done?
Alien.
Yep.
Is there another?
There's 3 others, including Blade Runner.
Fuck. What else has he even made?
There's 2 that you'll probably get within the next 10 seconds, and 1 that you'll be like, oh yeah, he did direct that. I've cursed you now by going. Okay, so he's done Alien, yeah? What else might he have done that is Alien related?
Oh yeah, Prometheus and Covenant.
Yep, but there's one more. There's one outlier that's a sequel in a franchise where he didn't originate it and he didn't.
I can picture it, and I can remember us talking about this fact, but
yeah. It's not very good. It's not a very good movie, but it's a sequel to a very good movie.
Jaws 2.
No, but that's a very interesting pick. I feel like that would be a lot more well-known if Ridley Scott directed Jaws 2, right?
Yeah. I could see that happening, though.
No,
give me another hint. Or
you want a clue, or do you want me to just tell you?
Give me a clue.
It is Hannibal. Hannibal.
Yes, of course, yeah.
the second Anthony Hopkins Hannibal film. You talked about Emmett Walsh before. How he's done 4 franchises, including Blade Runner.
Yeah.
What are the other 3?
Is he in a Muppet
No,
movie?
sorry, there are actually, I misspoke. Blade Runner is his 5th film that he's appeared in on film franchise Fortnights.
Yes, is he in a Muppet film?
No, he's not in a Muppet film. I reckon all 4 of these are so just plucked randomly.
Yeah, he's that kind of actor.
That it's going to be pretty hard to guess.
Yeah.
I didn't remember he was in any of these, for example.
Yeah. And what? Oh, in any of them.
In any of these movies.
Yeah, no, just tell me. I'm also not going to be able to guess how many Edward James Olmos films we've done.
Emmett Walsh was in Romeo plus Juliet, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, Critters, and The Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power.
Wow.
This is our 4th Daryl Hannah film.
Kill Bill 1 and 2.
I feel like Kill Bill 1 and 2, and she's also in Addams Family Reunion, which I did not remember. Our 2nd and 3rd Sean Young film, so she plays Rachel in Blade Runner, and she is sort of recreated in Blade Runner 2049, but is credited.
She's like thanked in 2049 more than
on Letterboxd. When you click films I've seen with Sean Young in it, Blade Runner 2049 is listed.
I guess more through.
She was
archival
on
footage.
set.
She wasn't.
Yeah. Well, she coached her body double how to.
Yeah. She's also in Ace Ventura.
Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, another problematic film starring Sean Young. And then we've got our 2nd Rutger Hauer film after... I'll just give this one to you. Also, The Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power, alongside Blade Runner co-star Emmett Walsh. And Blade Runner and 2049... Sorry, okay, how many Dave Bautista films do you think
he's
get
in,
up to?
I can't
with
remember
which Scorpion, in 2049?
Which Scorpion King he's in.
Yeah, he's in The Scorpion King 3, Battle for Redemption.
Yeah. So he's in that. He's in Guardians 1 and 2. He's in Infinity War and Endgame.
Yep, and for those playing at home, we have not covered Guardians 3 on the podcast, so I did not include it.
Or Love and Thunder.
Correct.
Not as part of, that wasn't part of the franchise then. That's all his MCU appearances, right?
Infinity War, Endgame, Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2. There are 3 more films.
3 more films. He's in Spectre. Inspector.
Like he's Inspector Spectre.
And then 2 more. He is also in...
I didn't remember he was in either of these. But we must have covered it since we last covered a Dave Bautista film, because I don't think I listed these the last time I asked you how many films we'd covered with Dave Bautista in them.
Yeah. He was in something recently that I... Oh, no, I'm thinking of... he was in The Boy and the Heron.
Knock at the Cabin. Okay, one of them is a sort of Puss in Boots style spin-off to another franchise, but it's a foreign franchise, so it's kind of interesting that an American actor...
The Raid, wasn't it? No, not The Raid. The Ip Man.
He's in Master Z, which is the Ip Man spin-off, and he's also apparently in Riddick. I didn't remember he was in Riddick. The third Riddick movie, not the... Make no mistake, the third Riddick movie. 2049 is our 3rd David Dastmalchian after Ant-Man 1 and 2. Our 2nd Robin Wright after... I did not remember she was in this, but the girl with the dragon tattoo. It is also 2049 is also our 2nd Sylvia Hoeks after The Girl in the Spider's Web, and our 2nd Mackenzie Davis film after
Terminator,
do you know this one?
Dark Fate.
The hard part is remembering which Terminator film she's in, what the sequel title is. Yeah, so 2049, Blade Runner 2049 came out in 2017. As I said, directed by Denis Villeneuve. What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes? You said it before.
88%,
making it lower in score than both the original cut and the final cut.
Yeah, which I think is interesting, and I think it is a little bit... Yeah, I like I said before, it's a hard film to market, and I don't think it was marketed. Well, I don't know. Audiences are getting stupider.
I would say that a film getting 88% on Rotten Tomatoes just means it's a good film, right? Like, regardless of what its predecessors also have, right? Like, it's
totally.
yeah. So, yeah. So, what is Blade Runner 2049 about?
So it's set 30 years later. There was between the two films, there was an event known as the Blackout, which might be explored in a short film or something like that. We'll see. But we follow a Blade Runner named K, and so the Blade Runners now are replicants. So just straight going into this film, you immediately find out that he's a replicant. It's never put into question. We'll get to that. And then, they're new Nexus models that can't disobey, essentially. So, because they had issues with replicant uprisings and whatnot, they have engineered ones to essentially be slaves, and so that is Ryan Gosling's character Kay. The film starts with him retiring Sapper Morton, played by Dave Bautista, and outside his little cottage
farm.
He finds this
protein farm.
He finds this box that has been buried, and when they dig it up, they find that it has it's full of bones, and they're able to identify them as the bones of Rachel from the first film, and it's through inspecting them, they're able to see that she gave birth, which is thought to be impossible, and so then Ryan Gosling is tasked with finding and killing the child, or like bringing the child in, because it is this freak of nature that should be studied, but is also a replicant that needs to be taken down. And so he has this sort of moral quandary of like, I can't take down a thing that was born because it has a soul. It's different than taking down replicants. All the while, he also has this like what's the word? Like hologram girlfriend called Joy, Joi, played by Ana de Armas. And at the start of the film, he gets this upgrade so that he can take her anywhere. And so, she's totally, perfect relationship. She's in love with him. Looks like Ana de Armas, but for all intents and purposes, isn't a real person. We also meet in this film Niander Wallace, who played by Jared Leto, who has sort of taken over. He's the same sort of character as Tyrell in the first film. He's like Wallace Corp is like the producer of the replicants, and also makes Joy.
Yeah, Neander Wallace is responsible for creating the new models of replicants that cannot disobey.
And so, once again, it is this very sort of slow film. You're doing detective work, tracing things. It eventually leads him to finding Rick Deckard, Harrison Ford from the first film, and he informs them that like, hey, you have a child that you didn't even know about. But also the sort of the central mystery of the film is that Ryan Gosling, I don't think we talked about this the first one, but replicants have like implanted memories, so they remember being younger even though they're only a few years old. And he has this one specific memory about hiding a little carved horse with a date on the bottom, and the date is the same one that he finds carved into the tree where Rachel was buried. And so he's like, essentially convinces himself that he is the child because he has the memories that only this child would have. He finds the toy horse hidden where he remembers hiding it, and so it's sort of like the whole time he's now got this weight bearing down on him that he is essentially the chosen one. And then spoilers for Blade Runner 2049, and something that I want to talk about, is that the second twist of the film is him finding out that no, you're not the child, every replicant has that memory implanted into them, because the person who designs the memories is the child, and she was designing it from what actually happened to her. And the film ends with Harrison Ford getting a chance to meet his daughter after, you know, Ryan Gosling has taken down the people chasing after them. And yeah, so that's what the film's about. Are you happy with that synopsis, AJ?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. Joy is smashed on their excursion to find Deckard, and I feel like the film all but confirms that Kay is killed at the end as well.
Yeah, he's mortally wounded, and he ends lying on some snowy steps in what must be a very uncomfortable position to lie in.
Yeah. He earlier in the film when he goes to retire. Sapper, Dave Bautista's character, Sapper tells him, like, you're only killing your own kind because you've never seen a miracle, which we come to learn is, like, obviously replicants understanding that a child can be born from them means that, like, perhaps they have just as much right to autonomy as natural born humans do. And there's a lot of said in the film about how, like, the idea of a miracle and especially dying for something you believe in.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think that's
the whole
Kay's journey.
The central question in the Blade Runner franchise is, like, what does it mean to be a human?
Exactly.
And yeah, that's explored, and that's a lot of what we talked about, like, is Deckard a replicant thing, because it's like, you know, what is a human? But yeah, I want to talk about the second sort of twist. That the first twist wasn't right. Because this is something I realized at the time, and at one point I was going to do a video essay. I think there's a video essay on this. And spoilers for a couple of other 2017 films, Coco and The Last Jedi, is that three of, you know, the biggest, or what should have been the biggest films of the year, have the same twist. That you're actually not related to someone special. It's fucking reversed in Rise of Skywalker, and it's so fucking stupid. But in The Last Jedi, Rey finds out your parents were nobodies, and in Coco he spends the whole time thinking, oh, my grandfather is whatever his name is, the Remember Me guy, and then turns out it's actually his partner who he stole. Anyway,
Robert Pattinson.
Yeah. Yeah. The movie where he gets 9/11 at the end. But But yeah, and I think it's a really interesting comment on society that, like, that's what we crave in stories now. Like, it's gone from the idea of this chosen one protagonist, something, yeah, for the top of my mind, like Harry Potter, that there's this prophecy about this kid, and there was, like, a fan theory that Neville should actually be the one prophesized, not Harry, because they both fit the prophecy. But yeah, I think that, like, the millennial generation, especially, who were raised telling you are special, you are perfect, and you can do anything you want, growing up and realizing that's not true, or growing up and realizing that everyone was told that. I remember the moment I realized everyone was told that. But then there's, like, a second realization you have after that, meaning that, like, that's fine. You can still be special. Like, it can come from anywhere. You don't have to be, or like, but also, you know, the way that we reject the monarchy, the way that we reject, like, all these other things, and, like, and Nepo babies are, like, a classic example of this, that, like, it's
chosen ones are inherently wrong.
Yeah, that it's much more comforting for us to believe that it can come from anywhere, rather than, oh my god, one day I could be the chosen one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think as well, in 2049, it's a case of it being the reverse of the Deckard is a replicant twist, right? Because in that film, it's like, it kind of is them saying, I guess a replicant wouldn't necessarily be the chosen one, but it's a journey of a man finding out that he actually is this thing that he has been sort of fighting against. And in this, or is he? And in this, it's like, it's about a man finding out he is not the thing that he suspected he was. And I think that it's a really fun kind of parallel, that there's like a thematically significant origami unicorn in the first film, and in this there is a wood carved thematically significant horse, right? Because a horse is the non-chosen one version of a unicorn.
I remember you said that to me after the film, and I was like, AJ's the smartest person I've ever met. And then you spent the next 7 years proving that wrong. But yeah.
Right. Wow, that's very nice. I'm going to ignore the second part of that sentence. So it's a movie about like dying for a cause that's bigger than you, which is very much, as you say, like the cold hard truth that our generation has come to learn after years of Disney movies and whatnot, telling us that like you can be the main character.
Well, it's like, it seems like we're all going to die in the next few years anyway, so it may as well be for a cause.
Yeah. So let's talk about the way we talked about it before, how this film treats answering or not answering if Deckard is a replicant or not.
Yeah, I've pulled up just quickly some quotes that I to like just specifically the stuff that I alluded to earlier. But yeah, Ridley Scott has always been adamant. He always says in interviews, yeah, Deckard is a replicant. But yeah, Hampton Fancher, who, like you said, wrote both films, said he wrote the character as a human, but wanted to suggest that he's maybe a replicant. When asked point blank, is he a replicant? He said, no, it wasn't like I had a tricky idea about Deckard that way. And then, in 2007, he believes that Deckard's a human, saying that Ridley Scott's idea is too complex, and also repeated that he prefers the film remaining ambiguous. And then Philip K. Dick even, has commented on it, saying the purpose of the story, as I saw it, was that in his job of hunting and killing these replicants, interestingly, he uses the term replicant, even though that's not from the book, Deckard becomes progressively dehumanized. At the same time, the replicants are being perceived as becoming more human. Finally, Deckard must question what he is doing, and really what is the essential difference between him and them. And to take it one step further, who is he if there is no real difference? Denis Villeneuve has said that awesome. Ford and Scott still argue about it. David Snyder, who was the art director, Rutger Hauer, who played Roy Batty, and M. Emmett Walsh, all think that he's human. The Sid Mead, who was the film's visual futurist, said that Deckard is a replicant. Douglas Trumbull, who is the VFX supervisor, says he does not know and thinks the issue is an enigma. And
damn, the VFX supervisor doesn't know.
Yeah. It's funny that they're getting like everyone to comment on this. Villeneuve said that, talking about 2049, said that Deckard is unsure, as are we.
Yeah, and that's kind of conveyed in the film. I think it's funny that Fancher, the screenwriter, says that it's that Ridley's idea is too complicated or too complex. When he wrote it? And because it's like, yeah. It's like, I disagree that, I think the story is better. Both stories are better if Deckard is at the very least strongly implied to be a replicant, right? But I will agree that the whole unicorn thing is a pretty funny way to to imply all of this, and maybe is only so explicitly like a hint because it was a removed scene. That and
that you could easily miss what that means.
When you're watching this recut of it, you go like, well, why is there a unicorn? Why was this one of the only scenes really added to the film? What does that mean?
It's the interesting thing as well that it's similar to the ending of like Inception, where it's not the important part of Inception is not whether or not he's in a dream. It's the fact that Leo no longer cares. And it's like the important part of Blade Runner, both films, is that like the seeds of doubt have been sown in Deckard's mind.
Yeah, exactly. And so the way it's dealt with in 2049 is there more than just his conversation with Neander Wallace that implies it? It's like,
to be honest, it's just not really brought up much.
so at one point when he gets captured, Neander Wallace sort of probes at this and says like, you know, questions if he's a replicant in so many words, and Deckard says, I know what's real. And that's all I think that needed to be discussed in that. And I think that all works really well. Yeah. One other thing that I really like about this movie and what I think it succeeds
we actually haven't really said what we think of it.
Yeah. Well, you talked about this thing you liked in it.
Yeah, I talked about one thing I liked in it. I think this is one of the greatest films ever made. I think this is a perfect film. It's incredible. This is to the second half of the 2010s what Mad Max Fury Road is to the first half of the 2010s.
Totally, I agree. I think that I'd forgotten how good it was. Like I remember loving it when it came out, and I think I rewatched it once with some friends a few years ago. But I guess all the imagery and stuff had just kind of stayed in my mind as like, oh yeah, I really like that movie. And then starting it up again, I was like, God, the story's good. God, this acting's good. God, this film is gorgeous. Like,
it's
all
one of the
these
most beautiful
things just
films
were
I've
like,
seen, just to look at.
Oh, totally. This is very cliche, but the kind of the shot they showed when Roger Deakins won his Oscar for cinematography, the only Oscar that this film was, it's the only one it won. I think it might have been one of the only ones it was nominated for.
It had a couple
as
of
well.
nominations, I'm pretty sure.
The one of after Joy has been killed and Kay is looking at the big hologram advertisement version of her pointing to him. That, I'm not very cool or original for saying this, but like, I think that's probably my favorite shot of all time. Like,
Yeah,
I think it is so just like aesthetically, obviously it's just really gorgeous. Like neon pink I'm looking at a neon pink sign out my apartment window as we speak. Like it is such a warm, comforting aesthetic for me. But I also love that, like this is a movie about a replicant who spends the whole time questioning if he's human, and that is then called into question when his girlfriend, who was a less advanced facsimile of a human than him, is now shown to be like a product, like definitively, like he's reminded of this. It makes him wonder, am I also just this?
It's a devastating, because he's just found out that, hey, you're not special, and then it's like, oh, also the love you felt, that wasn't special either. That was manufactured. It was
manufactured, yeah, and sold to you. And I love all that about it. And I think it is also aided by the whiff of like dominatrixness about that shot, particularly because the way he has programmed his version of Joy is to be very genuinely very nice and caring and loving. But this version of Joy that is presumably the default model is like a sex object, right? But she says like, oh, you look lonely, and she looks really sexy, and it's
she's also named after a subgenre of porn.
Exactly. And it's this thing that's like it adds to it, because now it's also like it's a little bit kinky that this is happening to him at this exact moment. And I just love everything this shot conveys. Is so good.
Yeah, totally. Well, and also just even the fact that they have like a 50-foot tall naked Ana de Armas just as a hologram. And something interesting, because the film actually received a lot of criticism for sexism at the time, that like the female characters are like, I mean, barring Robin Wright, but people sort of picking out that like you've got these sex workers like Mackenzie Davis, you've got this idealized perfect housewife in Ana de Armas, you've got Love, who was like the primary villain of the film, but she gets this brutal death, and you're supposed to be cheering that she gets strangled and drowned. People called this eye-gougingly sexist, and there's a lot written about it. But something that's interesting, and something I think Mackenzie Davis said about it, is that like the misogyny is like part of the dystopia, that the idea that like the society is advanced to this place where women are sex workers or are like products to be sold, which is, again, it's like why do we need to have this be part of the dystopia? But it's like, it's an interesting thing that, I guess, a more kind of subtle thing, in the way that, it's
I
gone
guess,
back to
I
very
guess
male
I
gazy.
just see it as like realistic though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
it's sex cells, and that's
this is a
next-
dystopia, as she said, and it's like, yeah, if you could farm synthetic humans, a lot of them would probably be pleasure models, as the film puts it. I'm not often on the side of claiming something isn't sexist, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not looking at this right, but like, I'll say this: I think that there is an argument to be had that maybe like someone like Agent K could have been a female character, or a female Blade Runner would be an interesting thing to see
I know,
in this context. But
Blade Runner 2099, the upcoming live action series, is Michelle Yeoh is playing the lead. Whether or not that means she's going to be a Blade Runner, but it remains to be seen.
Cool.
But we don't know.
Yeah. So what I really like about this film is that, let's look at something like T2 Trainspotting, a movie we covered recently that's also a legacy sequel and a fairly well-received one. And so maybe it's not a good example. What's a better example? Okay, another Harrison Ford example. Right? Like,
you haven't told me what you're comparing it to, and you're like, what's another example?
So I think the things that legacy sequels get criticized for is often like surface level revisits of nostalgia bait, right? Where it's like, hey, remember how much you loved the first Star Wars? What if you essentially saw the same film again, but with better cameras? And I didn't love T2 Trainspotting. I certainly don't think it's better than Trainspotting, and for various reasons, but at least it is sort of doing the similar thing where it's like, genuinely revisiting these characters all this time later to see how they would have organically developed. I think Clerks 2, while also not a very popularly received film, does this really well as well. But okay, here's the difference with 2049 is that it changes the protagonist. And while Deckard is in it and it kind of ends the film being like, this is still Deckard's story, which I do like. But at least for the first half of the film, it is not revisiting a character and being like, hey, welcome back, let's look at who this character has become, but instead revisiting a world and a story. And it is such an organic development of the story to be like, well, what if Rachel and Deckard had a kid together?
Yeah, what if
that did happen? What if they raw dogged because they thought, well, nothing's going to happen? I mean, you can't have kids. You're a replicant. I'm maybe a replicant. Who fucking knows? So, like, I think all of that is the reason why I feel it's a relatively uncontroversial take to say that this is probably the best of the Lego sequels that have been released. It is... You do not roll many eyes by declaring this one the superior of the two films. And I think that's an incredible milestone. And I did make a video essay about
the only
this.
other Lego sequel that would be in the contention, which is I guess it's a kind of in a similar way to this film, but would be Creed.
Totally.
I feel like those are the two in contention for it.
What I guess I'm saying is Blade Runner 2049 is slept on in the conversation about what makes a good sequel.
Yeah, true.
Which is already a slept on conversation, I think. But not for us, because it's like all we fucking talk about.
Yeah.
But
one thing I want to talk about with this film is like, up until recently, and probably even after I saw this film, I didn't consider Ryan Gosling to be a very good actor. I thought he was pretty wooden. Although actually I think Nice Guys came out before this, and I liked him in Nice Guys, but I always thought that he was like not that exciting of an actor, and people acted like every time he was cast in something it was like, oh hell yeah. And I think he's interesting in this film because you could watch this, and I think I did in 2017 and said he's not really doing anything, but I think that Ryan Gosling's default is like such a repressed, like he plays that so well, and that is the whole point of his character. Like his character is supposed to be essentially emotionless, and he actually there's an interview with him where he talked about how like the hardest part of doing this film is that like is learning to act like every single thing around him is mundane. I saw a GIF of someone posted on Twitter or something of him getting into his car, and it's like this weird, futuristic car, and he does it in such a way that it looks like he's done this 1,000 times. And it's like, these are such interesting things that like, you wouldn't necessarily think about, but it's like, everything he does has to be boring. But as his struggle continues in the movie, there's a famous gif of him screaming from this film, which is like the one moment he lets his emotion out, because he's not supposed to really be able to feel them. And also earlier on in the film, Mackenzie Davis is like, oh, well, you don't even smile, and he doesn't smile throughout the entire film until right at the end, when he realizes essentially he's died for this cause. Like he's completed it. He's reuniting Harrison Ford with this child, and he's saved him, and he's saved her, and all this stuff. And yeah, like with more looking back on it now, I think it's a great performance. I think it's a very understated performance. But one performance I do want to talk about in this film with you, AJ, is that of 30 Seconds to Mars frontman Mr. Jared Leto, because Jared Leto is sort of the antagonist of the podcast here. And I remember there was a quote from Denis Villeneuve I think before the film came out, when they...
I've got it in front of me if you want me to
read
it out. Yeah, I copied this down because I was like, well, this makes me like Denis Villeneuve a lot less.
Yeah.
So Neander Wallace, who's played by Jared Leto in the film, an actor who I feel like I was first to the party of being like, this guy sucks, and now the rest of the world agrees with me.
Totally.
Thank God. Originally, David Bowie was.
I wanted to read this quote. I want to talk about that in a sec. Yeah.
Okay, this is Villeneuve describing the first day that Jared Leto walked on set. He entered the room and he could not see it all. He was walking with an assistant very slowly. It was like seeing Jesus walking into a temple. Everyone became super silent, and there was a kind of sacred moment. Everyone was in awe. It was so beautiful and powerful, I was moved to tears.
Yeah, so it was, I remember like us reading that quote and being like, God, don't let fucking Jared hear you say that. But like,
yeah,
the thing is,
compares him to Jesus.
Yeah, like because also, yeah, Neander Wallace in the film is blind. He's got these sort of like opaque contact lenses on. But I think Jared Leto is not only like inspired casting, I think he's really good in the film. Because and that quote is sort of like made me think about it, that it's like the character of Neander Wallace is supposed to be someone who literally thinks he is a god, who thinks he is Jesus Christ, because he creates them. He demands to be the first person that these replicants see, so he can essentially imprint on them and whatnot. And it's like, yeah, you need an actor who embodies, I think I am Jesus, and I think he is inspired casting. I think it's a really great thing. But you mentioned there, David Bowie was Villeneuve's first choice for the role. He died before filming started, or around the time filming started, and also with like how difficult it was to get him to agree to be in The Prestige. I don't know that David Bowie would have necessarily even done it, but fuck, man, that would have been game-changing casting. Holy fuck! Like, same thing in the Prestige, is that it's like in The Prestige, you need a shortcut to tell you that Nikola Tesla is like a fucking rock star, and like this other, like literally could be an alien. That's how advanced he is compared to everyone else. You get the man who fell to Earth himself, David Bowie. And I think that like, David Bowie as Neander Wallace is like forever, I think, going to be one of my all-time cinema what ifs. That like, instead of having a character who feels themselves as a god, you have an actor who makes that character that everyone else sees him as a god. And I think it's like, it's almost like a different interpretation of the character, and would affect the story in a certain way as well. But yeah, my God, I wish we had gotten to see that. But again, I don't, with his sickness, if this film had come out a couple of years earlier, I think with his sickness and his sort of retirement from acting, more or less, I don't know that he necessarily would have done it, but he's barely in the film, so maybe he could have just shown up for a couple of days, but yeah.
My least favorite thing about Jared Leto in this film is that he doesn't really like the character just leaves the room and is not seen for the rest of the film, right? And he's such an important character that, unfortunately, this is probably the one actor I would want to see return for another Blade Runner movie.
Wow.
Because it's like, this is who you... like, it is a loose thread left dangling in the film is like, well, what happens to Neander Wallace? Like, I guess, like, narratively what happens to him is that he is led to believe that Deckard was killed and therefore the loop is closed. But
yeah,
this is who you'd make a third Blade Runner movie about.
Totally.
Would be this character.
I know he's one of the prequel shorts involves him. He, like, Jared Leto is in it, and I think the character played by someone else is in the anime.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. I want to check all this out.
I've seen all three of the shorts. They're really interesting. I watched them.
I've seen them before. I need to rewatch them. Let's do them for film franchise.
Yeah, we will. I bought the
a
Blu-ray
bunch of other
this,
stuff.
So
right,
yeah.
Nice.
Well,
Richard, we're talking about sequels and continuations of the franchise. I sort of just spoiled my continue the franchise just then. Do you want to move on to continue the franchise?
We can, and this is where we get to have the conversation we teased at the start, isn't it?
And it's right at the end of 1,000 other things to talk about in the continue the franchise segment. So we're whetting the appetite even more.
Your appetites
so
are
this
going
is
to
a
be
segment where we
sopping. I know it's spelled differently.
This is a segment where we pitch our own sequels, which I sort of just did. Well, it's a combination of two things I've sort of spoiled already, which is I think there should be a female Blade Runner, and I think it has to be about Jared Leto, annoyingly. This probable sex offender that I am insisting needs to...
Get his trans character from Dallas Buyers Club, and then two birds with one stone.
I mean, I get actually, if 2099 is our next bookmark with the series that's coming out, maybe we can recast Neander Wallace as like an old dude.
Who's 50 years older than Jared Leto.
Mr. Nobody is a movie in which Jared Leto plays an old dude, so
that's like Dick Van Dyke or something.
He has
who's like 100.
Dick Van Dyke.
How's Jared Leto?
Such a random casting choice as Dick Van Dyke as Neander Wallace.
He's 52. Okay, so how many 102-year-old actors do we know? Old actors. Oldest living celebrities. Ray Anthony from 16 Candles.
Perfect. Wow. That's the best casting choice I think we've ever come up with on this podcast. So in terms of what already exists in the realm of sequels, there's a bunch of stuff that is going to come out, a bunch of stuff that has already come out, and a bunch of stuff that isn't really sequel.
That will never come out.
So what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about first? Pick a category.
Let's talk about what has come out.
So as you mentioned, there are 3 tie-in short films to 2049, sorry. Those are called Blade Runner Blackout 2022, 2036 Nexus Dawn, and 2048 Nowhere to Run. Really wish they all had the same titling format, but there you go.
Yeah, totally. 2022 is an anime about the blackout. Nowhere to Run is like a day in the life of Sapper Morton, and then Nexus Dawn is the Neander Wallace one, I think.
Yeah. Blade Runner Black Lotus is an anime series that came out in 2021 that I remember hearing about but didn't know it was out, so I might check it.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to watch it. There's only 13 episodes. I'm interested because I just haven't heard anything about it, like whether it's good or not.
Yeah, neither. It takes place in 2032 and includes familiar characters from the Blade Runner universe. It is set 10 years after the anime short Blackout 2022, and from what I understand, Blackout 2022 is essentially a backdoor pilot for Black Lotus. There are also 4 tie-in novels released after the first film up until the year 2000. These are called Blade Runner, A Story of the Future, which I think is just the novelization of Blade Runner. Then there's Blade Runner 2, The Edge of Human, Blade Runner 3, Replicant Night, and Blade Runner 4, Eye and Talon. And I don't know what they are about. In terms of video games, we've got a shoot 'em up from the 80s called Blade Runner. There was also a 2018 VR game called Blade Runner Revelations, and there is an upcoming next-gen title announced called Blade Runner 2033 Labyrinth, which I am choosing to look at in the same way this new Dune next-gen game is.
Right.
Like Dune, which was once upon a time going to be directed by Ridley Scott, but our blockbuster piece for the video game
by Denis Villeneuve.
Denis Villeneuve. Blockbuster piece for the Blade Runner video game category is another a 1997 point-and-click game called Blade Runner in parentheses Enhanced Edition, and unpaid intern Vinny played this game and has provided us with a little review I will read now. We did ask our other unpaid intern Rachel to read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Still getting through it, so we will maybe feature that report on a film franchise follow-ups. Blade Runner Enhanced Edition is a point-and-click adventure which follows Detective Ray McCoy as he investigates various replicant-related crimes that happen alongside the events of the original film. Vinny has said this is what happens in his playthrough. Begins with the same opening text from the film establishing the world of Blade Runner in Los Angeles, November 2019. A cutscene plays with a break-in of an animal marketplace in the city. A replicant known as Clovis comes in and murders all the animals, even kills a dove with his bare hands to show the difference between him and Roy Batty, who does not kill a dove in Blade Runner. Introduce the protagonist with Roy McCoy narrating inside their car about being on the force for 1.5 years. He sees a massacre and realizes a young replicant, Lucy, is also missing. McCoy reports to Lieutenant Garza because Chief Bryant is busy. While snooping for I think Bryant is Emmett Walsh's character. While snooping for the first case, 2 more murders happen, this time to former Tyrell Corp employees. One that ran various gravity tests on replicants, another that did R&D on the skin of replicants. McCoy visits Tyrell's office, speaks to Rachel. She reassures McCoy that the Nexus 6 models are dangerous but does fear for the safety of Tyrell himself. More investigating happens, ties to J.F. Sebastian, who's a character from the original film. McCoy heads to his address to interrogate him, but is jumped by Clovis and his partner Sodic. McCoy is knocked out and has a dream about being on Mars with a young Lucy while a bomb goes off, which feels directly lifted from Watchmen, in which a character has a dream about being on Mars when a bomb goes off. Wakes up to find Lucy is watching him and views Clovis as a father figure that used her to case out the animal shelter. McCoy escapes. More investigating reveals a secret militia black market for selling weapons to replicants. Once this black market is found by McCoy, he is apprehended by cops and under order of Lieutenant Garzo. The order tells all LAPD that McCoy is a replicant and needs to be taken in immediately. We are near the end here. McCoy is saved by fellow Blade Runner Crystal Steele, who senses a bigger conspiracy is at hand. Clovis and Sodic kidnap one final Tyrell Corporation employee, conjoined twins Luther and Lance, and reveal they are looking to fix the 4-year lifespan. McCoy finds the twins who can not fix the lifespan, but do reveal that Clovis is the one that told them that Garza that told Garza that McCoy is a replicant, also that Garza is a dirty cop and gives police weapons to the replicant black market. McCoy confronts Garza, kills him, accepts his place as a replicant among Clovis, Sodic, and Lucy. Steele tries to stop McCoy and ends up killing Lucy. McCoy kills Steele in return, escapes on the moon bus, and there are 13 possible different endings.
Wow.
That can happen. They stem from 3 main outcomes, which is McCoy is human and hunts down the replicants. McCoy is a replicant himself and sides with the other replicants, and McCoy's status remains ambiguous, and he sides neither with the replicants nor the police, instead leaving the city behind or with a companion he made along the way. Vinny then gives us a little review and says he doesn't really like point-and-click games. Had to pull out a guide, so it's very hard to do.
Yeah.
Says, I will need some joy of my own to recover.
Nice.
You dirty dog.
Interesting to note, I've got the Wikipedia page open for this, and Lisa Edelstein, who played Cuddy in House, plays Crystal Steele, and also Paulie Perrette, who from NCIS, Abby Shuto, plays Lucy. The two shows I would watch with my mum in high school. In the mid 2000s.
I think it's interesting that this game sounds like the most full-fledged sequel for a long time. You know, this came out in the 90s, so
world expansion.
But so that's pretty interesting. Then in terms of what's to come, screenwriter Hampton Fancher has revealed that he was considering reviving an old story idea, including Deckard traveling to another country, and Ford stated that he was open to returning if he liked the script. In January 2018, Scott stated that he had another story ready to evolve and be developed, and that there is certainly one more to be done for sure. And in January 2020, Villeneuve expressed an interest in revisiting the universe in a different way, making something disconnected from both other movies as opposed to a direct sequel. There's a whole bunch of stuff we haven't really talked about that Ridley Scott was going to do 2049, but got caught up in Alien Covenant and has kind of expressed that he doesn't really like 2049 that much, or at least said he thinks it's too long, which, like, man, look at the track record of Denis Villeneuve versus the track record of Ridley Scott in recent years. And of course, what's probably the most exciting thing on the horizon, in late 2022, Amazon announced a Blade Runner 2049 sequel series called Blade Runner 2099. And so that is in development. It's apparently going to come out later this year. Ridley Scott stated that a pilot for a Blade Runner television series and the show's Bible had been written in November of 2021, with the project likely to consist of 10-hour-long episodes. Scott was in early negotiations to direct, but before Canadian director Jeremy Podeswa was put onto the pilot. And now Jonathan Van Tulleken is apparently directing the first two episodes instead, replacing Paul Dessoir, who stepped down. And in May 2024, Michelle Yeoh was cast in the lead role, and in June 2024, Hunter Schafer joined the cast. So pretty exciting cast for a Blade Runner TV show. I'm fucking jammed for it. I'll watch this.
Yeah, jam it down my dick.
Jam it right down there.
Now, AJ, there is one more thing left to talk about into the franchise, and that is the 1998 film Soldier.
Yes. So, Paul W.S. Anderson, the bad Paul Anderson of the two Paul Anderson directors, and David Peoples, who it was the writer for Soldier. David Peoples wrote the original Blade Runner with Fancher as well.
It was I think Fancher and Scott ended up splitting ways, and then Peoples finished redid the script. Right. I don't think they actually worked together.
Basically, Soldier, Peoples wrote it to share some in-universe elements with Blade Runner, and sees it as a sidequel spiritual successor, seeing both films existing in the same universe. The film has other things from Philip K. Dick movies in them. This is the list of things that appear in Soldier, which is a sci-fi movie starring Kurt Russell that has abysmal reviews. A spinner, which is what they call the flying cars in Blade Runner, can be seen in the wreckage of a junk planet in the film. One of the battles Kurt Russell's Todd fought in, according to battle records tattooed on his arm, was the Battle of Tannhauser Gate, which is this contextless, alluring thing referred to by Roy Batty in his monologue. An implication in the film is that genetically engineered soldiers are meant to replace Todd and his fellow soldiers. It's implied that these are replicants, and 2036 Nexus Dawn, the 2017 short film, also implies that Nexus 9 replicants were developed around 2036, which is when Soldier takes place. And incidentally, the Battle of Tannhauser Gate is shown on screen in one of the film's deleted scenes. But none of that's very interesting, because what Richard wants to talk about is one time we had a fight over whether or not we should watch Soldier when we cover the Blade Runner franchise.
So AJ was adamant that we should cover it. I see all that, like, you listed 4 things that connect it. 2 of them are just the words Tannhauser Gate, and one of them isn't in the film. The other one is some junk in the background, which is an Easter egg. I don't think it needs much explanation. Like, I don't think it implies, a shared universe. And then I don't know the context of the implication that they're replicants. It could just be, people read into it. But the interesting thing and I think that it's genuinely an interesting argument to have, because I'm like, you said the writer wrote it as he says it's a Blade Runner sequel, sidequel, spin-off, whatever. That means it is. And you said Blade Runner is a 3-film franchise. We need to cover this. And I foolishly conceded maybe it would be interesting to do for film franchise follow-ups. And you were like, ha! You agree with me. I win. And I was like, AJ, I was just trying to end the argument. Like, I
doesn't sound like something I would
stupid.
say.
I think it would be fucking stupid to do for film franchise follow-ups. But the actual interesting thing of this argument, and I think you've changed slightly since then. But that I remember reading a quote about playwriting, and it's that when you go to watch a play, you are going because of the writer's work. When you see a William Shakespeare thing, it doesn't matter who directed it. You are going to see it because of the script. This is a gross overgeneralization. Don't fucking come at me being like, actually, I'm a fan of this theatre director. I don't give a shit, okay? What I'm saying is that, like, generally speaking, the play is the work of art. Like, the text is the work of art, not the performance of it. Whereas for film is a director's medium rather than a writer's medium. The film is the work of art, not the script. Actually, I'm a big fan of... I don't give a shit who your favourite screenwriter is.
Are you talking to me or some theoretical straw man who's giving you the delicious rebuttals?
I'm talking to someone very specifically, but I'm using them as a straw man. So you know who you fucking are.
That's too mean, right?
No, I don't think it's too mean. There is no specific person. But then, interestingly, because I think, more so in 2017 or when we had this argument, that, like, I think you definitely would be coming at it from more of a writer's perspective, because I think you do a lot more filmmaking these days than you did then. But, like, at the time, you definitely would have considered yourself a writer. And so I think this idea that, like, well, the writer put it in, and they are the foremost voice, like, that they are the god in the word of God. Whereas, I definitely prefer directing to writing, but, like, in my mind, it's like, no, the director's God and word of God. And yeah, I like, while you've said that you've come around, and it is one of these classic things where I bring up a previous argument to make you look stupid, I do think it is genuinely an interesting thing about, like, it's essentially about death of the author.
I mean, all of what you're saying is super interesting, but I don't think that's what I was thinking at all. I don't think I was thinking about word of God. I don't think I was thinking, well, I'm a writer, therefore I'm going to consider the writer's word higher than the director's word.
I think you were doing that subconsciously. I think it's a subconscious thing, though.
Okay, well, I think subconsciously you think that you're a poopy stupid head. There.
Yeah. No.
You can't just say, well, AJ, you might be defending your position now, but I think subconsciously you do believe this. Okay. Cool. Good that you think that, bro.
No, I just genuinely think that, like, that was the divide between us, is like, you were taking the side of the writer and I was taking the side of the director, and I just think it's an interesting thing that, specifically in whenever we have this argument, those are what we would have considered ourselves more than the other.
I don't think so. I don't think... Well, first of all, I also don't think you would concede that director's word of God counts in all cases either, especially if it's something
I think it holds more weight than the writer.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I don't think I ever did, and I also don't think I ever thought of myself as particularly more of a writer, or certainly not at that time, more of a writer than a director, or considering the point of view of the writer. I didn't even know the writer's name. It was just what I can tell you how I was approaching it from. I was approaching it from someone who ran a podcast about franchises, and I thought this was an interesting little wrinkle to discuss the concept of a franchise within. I've changed my mind now because I think that Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 there's enough interesting shit in them as a duology that I don't need to but like to me this was the equivalent of doing the Planes movies when we do the Cars movies, right? It's like it's just an interesting. If our podcast is about exploring franchises, and here's a little known apparent piece of extra world building, then we should cover that. And you being so violently adamant that we shouldn't do that made me violently adamant that we should. And that's all that happened. I don't care that I'm glad we're not watching Soldier. It sounds like a terrible movie. I don't want to watch it.
I think it's interesting to have this conversation. I don't think it's interesting to watch the film. And
then we agree. We agree. That's all I wanted to do was have this conversation, and it was like you didn't even want to have the conversation.
No, you were like, I'm downloading Soldier now, just in case we cover Blade Runner soon.
Richard, that's not true because I would never download a film. That's illegal.
Wow. All right, continue the franchise.
Yeah, I get Jared Leto comes back and there's a female Blade Runner. That was here's the issue is that everything you could pitch for a Blade Runner continue the franchise has kind of been done. Like it is such it is a franchise that has been mined for sequels or supplementary material in multiple very interesting ways before the second movie even came out. So that's kind of where I got stuck, was trying to think of anything.
I don't think I'm smart enough to come up with a Blade Runner sequel. Like I think it's a world continuing worth exploring, but I mean the only thing would be in a video game or something like that. I think it would be a perfect open world video
but again,
game,
that's already coming out. So it's
exactly. I don't know, like the ending of the final shot of the film of like Harrison Ford seeing his daughter for the first time and just like having this slight smile appear is so perfect. It's like, wow, I don't know if I want to see that character again. It is interesting though, I did watching the film realizing how like not very far we go in this dystopia, that like Deckard's hiding out in Vegas, we see like San Diego, we see California, but like we never see other countries, but again that's maybe being done. But I don't know, maybe do we just get some random sci-fi film about rich assholes and then it's revealed at the end that this is off-world?
That's a cool idea. Yeah.
In the Blade Runner world.
I was just to say, like, I think it's interesting you don't want to see Deckard again. Because maybe I do. Like what happens next? Do they escape together? Isn't his daughter confined because she's like immunodeficient? Like is she living? Is that a private residency? Is Deckard allowed to stay there with her? You know what I mean? Like I have a lot of questions that mainly are to do with like the safety of the character, because fucking Ryan Gosling just died right outside this house, so the cops are probably going to know
covered in snow.
The cops are probably going to know where he is because he probably has chips in him or something. That like their tracks aren't covered.
Gets snackish.
I guess. Yeah,
but the it's interesting. It's similar to another Denis Villeneuve ending where it's like in Prisoners, where it's like this is a happy ending, but if it goes on for another like 30 seconds, you're like, wait a second, what's going to happen? This is not a happy ending. And so that's like the thing why I don't necessarily want to see Deckard again, because we're leaving him in a happy state. And then to be like, he can't hug her
Or escape. That's more what I was thinking.
But before we move on to our last couple of segments, there's a couple of quite often when we cover films, especially like classic films, we always get comments that are like, I can't believe you didn't discuss this, and I've just been writing down a couple as we've been going that I want to just check off. So one is probably the most iconic part of Blade Runner, the most talked about, the Tears and Rain speech. You mentioned it briefly, but we did talk about that.
I purposefully didn't mention it because I did a little parody of it earlier for Problematic Corner, and I thought it would be weird to read it out in full beforehand.
But yeah, like, what do you think of the Tears and Rain speech? It's often reported as like Rutger Hauer improvised this. It's not, as far as I can tell, he wrote it like a day or two before shooting, but it wasn't like he was supposed to be like, well, here I go, and just came out of this instead.
From what I've seen, it's more that there was a much longer speech and he just didn't do all of it. That's basically what it is. No, I love it. I think like it is maybe one of the best pieces of world building ever made. Just that monologue. I mean, there's a Wikipedia page for the monologue, right?
For the monologue, yeah.
And I think it's what I was saying before about worlds not desperate to explain themselves. Is that it's a line. It's a monologue, and when I say monologue, it's something like 40 words, so it's not even that long.
Yeah,
of
it's
a
like
monologue.
4 sentences. Yeah. Do you remember it off by heart?
No. Do you?
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. It's like attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. Something at the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments lost in time, like Tears and Rain, Time to Die.
I've got it in front of me now. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, what's the... watch C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. Is the Tannhauser Gate bit.
Yeah. So, I think it's great because in the context of the world, Deckard, who this is being spoken to, probably understands what Roy Batty is talking about, but we don't. And what the point of this monologue is
he's like shit. You like seeing the C-beams glitter in the Tannhauser Gate is like getting tickets to the Eras tour.
Yeah,
it's like, damn, you saw that?
Or seeing like the Northern Lights or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the what information is being communicated to the viewer here is isn't life so silly and fickle, and look at how all of this doesn't matter because you know, I'm programmed to die. I'm programmed to expire. So all of this is being lost. And the point is to humanize this character, right? And to question what is human, right? So that's what's thematically being conveyed. But what is actually being said is just a bunch of world building, just a bunch of stuff that we are given zero explanation for. And if this was in Star Wars, Richard, if they didn't over-explain it in the dialogue, you bet your ass there would be several spin-offs about the Battle of Tannhauser Gate. You know, or
and fixing
Roy,
some.
And I mean, I guess that maybe that's what Soldier was trying to do, but like, it's just an example where you don't need to hear, because why would you when you're dying, you've got 42 words left to say. Why would you?
It's like in one of those TikTok trends where it's like you wake up in the morning and you've got your amount of words above your head.
yeah. Like,
and he wakes up with 42 and he's like, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So I've actually got the original speech from one of the draft screenplays, and just to show you the different vibe of what it originally was. I've known adventures, seen places you people will never see. I've been off-world and back. Frontiers! I've stood on the back deck of a blinker bound for the Plutician camps with sweat in my eyes, watching stars fight on the shoulder of Orion. I've felt wind in my hair, riding test boats off the black galaxies and seen an attack fleet burn like a match and disappear. I've seen it, felt it. And then the shooting script before Rutger Hauer did a rewrite was, I've seen things you little people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion, bright as magnesium. I rode on the back decks of a blinker and watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments, they'll be gone. And then Howard said that it was opera talk and high-tech speech with no bearing on the rest of the film, so he put a knife in it the night before filming without Scott's knowledge.
And thank God he did, because it's very close to not being a very well-written monologue.
Yeah, like Tears in Rain is such a great thing.
Such a good James
one of my
Bond
favorite
song.
bands, one of my favorite bands, Fight Star, who's a spin-off of Busted, Charlie Simpson's other band, have songs called Tears in Rain and Tannhauser Gate. And the song Tears in Rain actually is about Neon Genesis Evangelion, interestingly. Well, it's called Lost Like Tears in Rain, I think.
Nice. Alrighty.
Sorry, I had two more things.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot what we were doing, and I dropped the card I wrote them on. Something interestingly that came up. I would be remiss to not ask you a follow-up on this, but I remember when we saw the film that we mentioned it briefly, that Rachel sort of reappears in 2049, and it's a mix of digital de-aging versus like deep faking. And I remember when we saw the film, we came out being like, and you were like, look like shit. I can't believe people thought that was good. And you have like reverse face blindness when it comes to digital de-aging. I think Sean Young,
It's never looked good once.
I didn't notice it, and when we saw the film in 2017 in IMAX, I didn't notice it watching it last night. What did you think of it now? I think Sean Young in 1982 is like impossibly gorgeous and like just such a perfect looking human that she already looks kind of fake. And so I think that maybe helps a little bit, but she does have that sort of haze about her that's just present by virtue of the first film being made in 1982. And it's, I guess, sort of feels a little bit out of place, but she's not on screen for very long or anything like that.
Right, so you can see that it's not real.
Not enough to bother me in the slightest, but I was looking hard for it this time.
What constitutes bothering me in the slightest? It's not like it ruined the film for me or anything. I can just tell that it's not really Sean Young.
Yeah, I guess it's in the same way that like I know that cars don't fly. Like,
sure. I mean, I think that if anything, there's an argument to be made that it adds to it. It's the same as the Jared Leto playing him, like playing a Jesus figure. Like, it is supposed, like he even rejects her because he says her eyes were green. Deckard does when he sees the clone of her. And that's what I mean. Like, this is it is for the film's benefit, whether it meant to be or not, that I don't think it looks like very
slightly
good.
Uncanny.
Yeah.
But no, I think it looks great, to be honest. Final thing. Well, one more thing that I've already mentioned, but is worth reiterating. Blade Runner has one of the greatest film soundtracks of all time. I think Vangelis didn't do many film soundtracks, but every single one he did is incredible.
What other ones did
Chariots
he do?
of Fire. Chariots of Fire, the famous piece of music from that. He did I think it's a Ridley Scott film as well, 1492 Conquest of Paradise, which the film is completely unremarkable by all accounts, but the score is incredible, and you may know it if you ever did take a kid to footy as a kid, AJ, that the instrumental song that the Crusaders come out to in Christchurch is the Conquest of Paradise. Yeah, it's a fucking incredible piece of music.
Never thought Take a Kid to Footy would be brought up on the podcast.
Yeah, but the last thing, we should have talked about this during our Soldier discussion, but there are implications that Alien takes place in the same world as Blade Runner as well.
So I nearly jotted this down as like dumb Wikipedia trivia, because it is mentioned on the Wikipedia page for like the Blade Runner franchise, under where it talks about Soldier. It says there's a headline for Alien, and I read and it just looks like someone really wants to be clever and just added it to the Wikipedia page, but there's nothing. There's just stylistic similarities.
Yeah, totally. But like Ridley Scott has said because Alien takes place further in the future than the Blade Runner. He has said, maybe half jokingly, that they could run into whoever. But there's like there's the like DVD extra that gives you a bio on each of the characters, and that's where it's revealed that one of them is trans, an alien or aliens. It also reveals that one of them worked for the Tyrell Corporation. So if you want to believe that character is trans, you have to also believe that these two films take place in the same universe.
But then you also have to believe that Soldier is part of the franchise. I don't have to do a
fucking thing.
Hey, just shut the fuck up! I don't have to get real mad. Richard, we've got to rank that franchise now, and we usually don't take this segment very seriously. Oh, look who it is. It's a digitally de-aged Sean Young just walked into Richard's recording booth. Well, anyway,
Sean Young. Sorry. I didn't realize I was too busy kissing my cat. I didn't realize what you wanted me to do.
No, I didn't know what you wanted me to do about your cat being involved. Maybe we're losing our chemistry after all these years, Richard.
Wow.
Can that happen?
It's because you brought up the soldier argument. I'm still mad at you. Oh my god, he's dead.
So, Blade Runner. And ranked at franchise, where something we typically don't take very seriously, but this is probably the first time in
and today will
years.
Be no different.
No, not at all. This is the first time in years that I've actually thought about where we're going to rank this ahead of time, and I wanted to confer with you about it because I think that the only thing holding this back is that it's only 2 films, and that if this was a trilogy, I would go as far as to say it's the best franchise we've ever watched. I think at least in terms of pound for pound, what does it do? It just does everything right as a franchise.
It's just a shame it's got Soldier dragging it down.
Yeah, exactly. I'm certainly going to give it a gold star, which is what we give franchises in which we feel there is no dud entry. But I think it would be a little foolhardy to rank it especially high when it is only 2 films, because I think that gives it an unfair advantage over something like Toy Story or the Before trilogy, which are both impressive because they have done it so well. They've kept up the quality. But what I do think this is comparable to is the Rocky franchise. It's, they both have problematic scenes in the first film. But so we've ranked the Rocky franchise at 4, below the Planet of the Apes reboot trilogy, which is below Toy Story and Before Sunrise. I'm of the opinion that the Blade Runner duology is easily the best duology we've covered.
Totally.
And ranks somewhere in the top 4 films. What do you think? So the top 4 from
when you started talking, before you even got into too much, I was going to say chuck it at 5 and be done with it. So we're thinking around the same sort of area.
So here's the top 4 so far. Before Sunrise or Before trilogy, the Toy Story movies, which maybe we need to have a conversation about because Lightyear, I think, affects our placement of that maybe ever so slightly.
I think it's below the nymphomaniac constant now. Sorry.
The speed constant. Then we've got the Planet of the Apes reboot trilogy. Then we've got Rocky. Richard, not only has what's Planet of the Apes, the Godfather trilogy is next. So it's worth noting that Rocky does not have a gold star, and The Godfather does not have a gold star. In 6th place, we've got the Three Colors trilogy, which does have a gold star. Yes. But I don't know, man. I feel...
Well, interestingly, I think you were just about to say that Planet of the Apes and Toy Story have both had new entries since being ranked.
Yeah, they both have, and are also both are shackled down by sister franchises, which... have more duds in them. Though Planet of the Apes doesn't have that many, which is why I think we still were able to rank it that highly. But I don't know. I would be comfortable with putting the Blade Runner duology at 2 or 3. What do you think?
Chuck it at 2. Let's Let's fucking make everyone go crazy. I don't think people rank anymore because
let's just go crazy.
Yeah, let's go absolutely Roy Batty.
I think that the Before trilogy should still remain in first place because that's a trilogy.
That's the greatest franchise of all time, AJ.
Equal quality films. Whereas, like, while I personally think Toy Story 4 holds up, I do think that Lightyear muddies the water a little, and muddies the water in the same way.
It also takes away its gold star.
That's true. Should I take it away right now?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, even 4, I would say, is probably a universally agreed upon worst one if you discredit Lightyear.
I think we need to look into that more. I feel like there's just not enough comment. I don't want to talk about Toy Story right now. What I was going to say is that Blade Runner having only 2 films is just as much of an impediment as Toy Story having a spin-off we just haven't happened to cover on film franchise Fortnights. Let's put Blade Runner in second place. I think if nothing else, the supplementary material sounds all pretty good as well, and is all pretty good from what I've seen. So a new second place, that's a pretty big deal.
Wow. I've also just unrelated but related to something we talked about earlier, seen a thing that about David Bowie. So his half-brother died by suicide in 1985, and Bowie left roses, got roses sent to his funeral that said, "You've seen," and had a note on them that said, "You've seen more things than we can imagine, but all these moments will be lost like tears washed away by the rain. God bless you, David." So he was a known fan of Blade Runner, so maybe he would have actually done it if he'd been able to.
He thinks he wrote that himself and just forgot that it's in Blade Runner. Here's a fun joke about someone's brother dying. Cool. So, Richard, that is our Blade Runner scushy. All we need to do now is decide on what the next 2 film franchise we're going to cover is. And we're going to do this by a little thing called Franchise Roulette, where you're going to give me a random number between 1 and 101. And I am going to tell you, I'm going to make you guess, like a little monkey, what that franchise could possibly be. Okay. So give me that number, baby.
9.
Duology number 9. Interesting. Okay, what's a good hint about this? I think the second one might potentially be quite hard to find. I think that it is going to celebrate a milestone anniversary this year, I think. Something like the 30th anniversary or the 40th anniversary this year.
Either a 1994 or a 1984 film.
Do you want me to look up when it came out? I can tell you.
Yeah, it's crazy that you wouldn't even know the decade. I'm trying to think of like what it is that you would be.
1994. It is a massive blind spot in my film watching life. But
is the sequel going to be hard to find because we have to find a bootleg of it because it's currently in cinemas?
No, but that would be
not
a funny.
Twisters.
No,
I would not want to have to watch that movie again.
To rewatch Twisters. No, it's. I would say that it's a blind spot in my filmography, but anyone not from a certain area would not even know this film exists.
Okay, wait. Because I was going to say Sione's Wedding then, but that's the time periods would be way off.
Sione's Wedding's a great place to be snooping around.
Oh, wait. Is it Pork Pie?
No.
When was the second one?
You've identified that it's a New Zealand film.
Jesus Christ. Oh, Once for Warriors?
Correct. We are covering
Brokenhearted?
Once for Warriors from 1994 and What Becomes of the Brokenhearted from 1999. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've never seen these before, these are harrowing New Zealand dramas that probably won't give us the same sort of bright-eyed, like happy discussion that we have when we talk about the films like Blade Runner. But yeah, I've never seen Once for Warriors.
Probably an episode a lot of people aren't going to listen to be honest.
Yeah.
I believe based on a book as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think both are. I think that's why the second one got made in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Once for Warriors and What Becomes of the Brokenhearted. When we started this podcast, I would always think about if we'd cover these one day, mainly because it's too many letters to fit into a YouTube title. So that whatever the YouTube upload of this will be called will have to be scaled back a bit, I guess.
It'd be like the Jake the Muss films.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so if you want to get involved in what's going to be a niche conversation about the plight of domestic violence in 90s New Zealand, come watch along with these films. And for those who don't know anything as well, What Becomes of the Brokenhearted is as obscure to us as Once Were Warriors probably is to any people not from New Zealand listening to this. So it'll be interesting if we can even find it. If we can't, I don't know, that'll be a fun little adventure to go on.
Yeah. We'll find
Alrighty.
it. It's on YouTube.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for listening, everybody.
Probably one of the easiest to find films we've had.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and tune in next week for that, or next fortnight for that episode. If you want to support the show, you can follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter/X, and join our Discord where you can chat about Blade Runner with us. Or if you want, you can donate for as little as $1 over at patreon.com/Cult Popture. And if you give us $5 or more, you get to ask something in the post-credit scene, which is coming at you after this music ends. Richard, tears and all is lost. Time to die. Time to end the podcast.
It's too bad the podcast won't keep going. But then again, what does?
Very good. Welcome along to the post-credit scene. This is a segment at the end of each episode where if you donate $5 or more over at patreon.com/Cult Popture, you get to give us something to talk about in this, the post-credit scene. Richard, who's it from and what is it?
Today's podcast comes to us from Jake, who says...
We're getting a whole podcast from someone.
yeah.
That's against the rules, or is it?
There's nowhere in the rules that it says that you can't send us a podcast. Today's question comes to us from Jake, who says, will you watch Evan Almighty with me September 22nd, 9 p.m. Eastern something time? Very
Probably
quick.
not.
We can give our very quick answer whether we will or not. But I do have a funny story about this.
Right. Okay. Should I give my quick answer first?
Yeah. When is?
That's
11 a.m. our time.
I will have just come back from Canada and will be going right into the throes of making a short film, so I'm not going to commit in one way or the other.
Yeah, if you do a Discord screening or something, I might pop in. But yeah, I can tell you, I know that the reason September 22nd is the thing is that is the date of the Great Flood in Evan Almighty, and the reason I know that off the top of my head is I remember in my first year of high school, 2006, I had a massive crush on this girl, and she, I professed my love to her, and she was like, "Oh no, that's not what happened." I had a massive crush on this girl, and I asked her out, and she said, "Oh, I'm really not looking for a boyfriend right now." And it's like, okay, fine, but my heart was broken. I was devastated, and this was on September 22nd, 2006. And then a week later, she hooked up with she started going off this guy and they were together on and off for like all of high school kind of thing. He was a total fuckwit. I ended up finding out later that Aaron, who we get on the Oscars podcasts, he went to a different school to me, but also had beef with this guy through completely separate means. Like they like played sports against each other. And so I always remembered, like, oh my god, September 22nd is the date that the day my heart was broken. I remember going home from school that day, and Here Without You by Three Doors Down was playing on the radio, and I was just like, oh my god, this just 100% describes my life right now. The following year, 2007, Evan Almighty came out, and I was dreading September 22nd, the 1 year anniversary of my heart being ripped in two. But I thought I'll go watch this this goofy, silly movie where he builds an ark or something. I don't know. And then the whole film is leading up to September 22nd, and it felt like the film was mocking me. And so I have always remembered that September 22nd is the date of the flood in Evan Almighty for that reason. Yeah. And then I believe there was some other thing happened on September 22nd, like the following year or the year after. And anyway, September 22nd, just like all throughout high school, especially with like the women in my life, was always like a significant date. And so yeah, I've just this movie that most people have forgotten, I remember a very specific detail about.
Don't often hear about the stories of heartbreak from your life, eh? It's usually an AJ.
Not that many of them, mate.
Storyline.